This is Cultural Mixtapes. I'm Tejas Srinivasan. Welcome to the show. On today's episode, we have novelist Emily Temple. She's currently the managing editor at LitHub, and her debut novel, The Lightness, was published in 2020 by Harper Collins. The Lightness is the story of three teenage girls who find themselves at a summer meditation retreat in Colorado called the Levitation Center. Determined to unlock the secrets of levitation, they embark on a quest over the course of the summer filled with enlightened realizations, deception, and a plethora of mishaps that certainly surpass the purview of regular high school experience. Emily and I sat down in early August to talk through her writing process, the autobiographical influences in the novel, as well as her nonfiction work. At LitHub, she prolifically chronicles developments in the literary world and its parallels while making countless recommendations that cover pretty much every reading niche I could think of. We also talk about one of the recent themes on Cultural Mixtapes, the internet and its effects on writing and art making. Her perspective, as someone who simultaneously works in internet media and as a novelist, is quite fascinating. Some background info for you. We touch on a study that Emily recently wrote about on LitHub, which studied the effects of reading literary fiction on the shaping of complex worldviews. The full paper, as well as other writers and books mentioned in the episode, are linked in the show notes. Hope you enjoy the show. Emily Temple, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start with your book, The Lightness, which was published in 2020. First of all, where did you get the idea of writing a book about high school girls at a summer meditation retreat?
From being a high school girl at a summer meditation retreat, my parents are Buddhists, and so every summer I went to which is a Shambhala meditation center in Vermont. And it was, and this is really before I was a teenager, starting when I was 10 or 12. And I loved it. It was my favorite place in the world. Beautiful mountain, all sorts of different kinds of people that I never met in my regular life. And so when it came time to start thinking about what I was going to write a novel about, one of the things that I started with was just this sense of place, this very weird, out of time, out of normal reality sort of place. There was no levitation when I was there, and there was not very much of the other shenanigans that they get up to. But yeah, I started with this place that's actually just very special to me.
Even with the title of the book, The Lightness, in the book itself, you play around with different definitions and give separate explanations and some dictionary definitions. If you had to explain just in any way you'd like what you meant by lightness, and feel free to pull a Truman Capote and mislead everyone, how would you do it?
Listen, lightness is different for everyone. My lightness isn't necessarily your lightness. Actually, one of the things that I think the book is about, in retrospect, I'm not sure that I can say I was trying to do this. The book is about asking the reader to decide whether magic exists. And I think the concept of lightness is really kind of the same thing. It becomes, what does it mean for you? And because I do go through so many different iterations of what it might mean. And early drafts of this novel had long pages of many different definitions for the word lightness. So I can send you my drafts, but the answer is there's no answer.
Lovely. That's exactly where I thought we'd end up. On those lines, throughout the book, you juxtapose writings of Buddhist teachers and then also jokes, magicians, dictionary definitions that then you turn into puns. You create this ambiguity throughout as to the character's belief in what they want to achieve and the overarching belief of the novel. And you go out of your way to make sure that the book is not dogmatic whatsoever. How did that decision come about, and what do you think that achieved?
It was very important to not be dogmatic for me, because one of the central questions that I had when I was beginning to write was, what is belief for? What does it do? And is it good? And belief doesn't just mean for me religious belief, but all the kinds of different beliefs and all the different ways of understanding the world that we all experience in any given moment. So for me, interweaving all of those different ways of approaching reality and truth, that just feels kind of like experience to me. That's how I experience the world. It's like a patchwork. It's lots of different things. One thing makes me think of another thing, makes me think of another thing. And I was just trying to unpack, or maybe not unpack, maybe pack in all of the different ways in which you might believe in something or not believe in something, and how you might relate to the craziness that is our experience.
You talk about your personal experience, and you just mentioned that you were inspired by your personal experience going to Buddhist retreats as a kid. I guess after writing this book, has your relationship with the religion and the faith changed, or how has that panned out after you wrote the book?
Well, my dad yelled at me.
Yes.
It's been interesting actually because, I was raised in adjacent to the Shambhala Buddhist community, and I was never fully immersed in it, but I always felt that I was part of it. And it's been really interesting to hear other people who are part of that community or have other relationships with Buddhism, reach out to me and say, thank you for writing this. I have never seen my experience as a white American Shambhala Buddhist like reflected in literature. And I've gotten people reaching out to say, I'm so sorry that you had such a bad experience, and I hope you'll try again.
Uh,
Which, you know, I didn't have a bad experience. So the reactions of readers have been really interesting. And I think, I'm not sure that it has changed anything for me. I've always had a very, I would guess, narrow relationship to it, which is that I think a lot of the teachings really work for me, and a lot of the community aspect does not work for me. So just personally, that was my relationship to it before, and it's still my relationship to it.
and do you think that when you set out to write this book, were you just trying to tell a story that you were interested in, or was your relationship with the faith a part of why you wrote the book?
It's definitely a part of why I wrote it. I mean, it's definitely something that I continue to think about and reevaluate. And when I was writing, I thought about it in ways that I haven't spent any time thinking about it before. So it's,
Hmm.
you really have to get in depth. You're spending years on this project. And
Yeah.
so it is something that I find so interesting, regardless of how it is as faith or religion or what have you, just the Buddhist instruction of working with your mind, just meditation as a experiential concept, I think is so interesting and really does change the way you might interact with the world. And so I did a lot more meditating while I was writing this book than I have done, just to be in it, just to experience it. And that probably served me pretty well. Didn't hurt anyway.
When you were setting out to write this, what was the research process like? You said you meditated more, both personally and like literal research, books and things like that. What did that look like?
I actually tried right up until the very end. I tried not to do any real research because
Hmm.
I wanted to have the narrator be coming from a similar place to where I was actually coming from, which is having absorbed all of this stuff, all of these stories, all of these anecdotes through this sort of naturalistic cultural osmosis. I was actually okay if she got some of it wrong,
Hmm.
because that's the point. She's remembering it, she's misremembering it. She heard a lot of it from someone who maybe wasn't totally telling her the truth,
Yeah.
and she heard a lot of it secondhand, and it becomes this sort of morass that the point of the book for her, for the narrator, is she's trying to work it all out. She's trying to see what was true, what was not. She's trying to follow the strands and see where they go. And so at the beginning, I just was like, I'm going to put down whatever I remember. I think I remember this story about Milarepa. I think I know what Tumo is. I think I do. I'm just going to put it down like this and then see what happens. And then in the end, I went back and there were certain stories that I looked into books to just remind myself, like, how did this actually go? Do I want it to actually go the way that actually goes? And I did some checking and changed a few things and didn't change other things. So, and then for things like, for instance, Tumo is a self-secret practice that you're not actually supposed to write about.
Yeah.
So that's something I got in trouble for with my dad. But but you can't actually learn it if you're not ready for it. So it doesn't matter.
You're exploring so many different nuanced aspects of the faith in the book, but you choose teenagers as your main characters. And as you're highlighting different ideas about limitations of the human body, meditation, whatever lightness is supposed to mean, why did you think teenagers were the best characters to do that with?
I think teenagers feel more than anybody else. They just
Really? Okay.
feel so much. They're so intense. And when they believe in something, they believe so much.
That
I
is true.
think as you get older, you sort of calm down and you maybe get a different sense of yourself. You experience more. You think, oh, maybe this isn't all there is. But when you're a teenager, when you fall into something, you fall so hard. You're so dumb sometimes.
Yeah, I'd
So
agree.
I just thought, if I really wanted to explore, like, what could it mean to be totally turned upside down by your own belief, it was more likely that it would work with teenagers than with supposedly saner adults.
Interesting.
Though
Yeah.
not to say that there are no adults who fall prey to this, but
Yeah. Teenagers feel more than everyone else. That's just interesting take. I'd agree though. I'd agree.
yeah,
Um
come on. I mean, remember when you were a teenager and it was just like, I mean, I would write in my diary and cry onto the page, and there's like teardrops in my diary, and I'm writing like the lyrics to Rent or something. Like, that's insane behavior.
it's its own unreliable narrator within itself, pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah.
I want to switch gears and talk about your work at LitHub. You love lists,
Huh.
book lists, movie lists, TV
Mm-hmm.
lists.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple bookmarked on my phone in case I'm short for reading material as well. And there are often debates about listicles in literary communities and other communities. What draws you to them, and what do you think they achieve that other articles or types of media can't?
Oh, come on. Everybody loves a list. The hate for lists is just because everyone secretly loves it and they're embarrassed. Look, I'm not going to say that lists are inherently more valuable than a well-researched news article or a well-argued essay, but there is something that is very satisfying about them. Umberto Eco said that we like lists because we don't want to die, or probably not exactly that, but they give you both the sense of something finite and something infinite at the same time. So when you look at a list, what's your experience? I can't believe I'm even giving them this much like lofty language, but when you look at a list, your experience is you're looking for stuff you already know and you're looking for stuff that's new to you. And so you get both satisfaction, assuming there are things that you already know and things that are new to you. You
Mm-hmm.
get both satisfaction and possibility at the same time. And also, you can get mad about it. That's what everyone really loves to do with a list is complain
Yeah.
and write and say, this doesn't have this. This should have had this. This shouldn't be on this list. And you could say there's too much complaining and arguing on the internet. There is something that is kind of fun about posting a list and then seeing all the comments where people add their own
Yeah.
suggestions. And it just doubles it. And it just becomes, I don't know, it's like almost a forum for crowd generated lists. It becomes this jumping off point. I find that fun about it. I don't like it when people write me angry emails, but That's okay.
Just reading another article that you wrote where you it was on the Atlantic and you highlighted syllabi of famous authors Zadie Smith, David Foster Wallace, and a syllabus is essentially a list, which got me thinking.
A syllabus is a list. And I mean, if you think about the list, it's actually used in all kinds of literature, it's used in all sorts of rhetoric. You could almost argue that novels are lists,
How so?
lists of scenes, lists of dialogue. I mean, my book obviously has a bunch of lists because
Yeah,
I love them. But poetry, think about a poem. What does a poem look like? It looks like a list.
yeah, that is true.
Deep
Uh,
thoughts.
anything to demystify poetry works. That gets that's gonna get me into the wasteland. It'll get me into the wasteland.
Yeah.
Um, on a slightly similar note, an idea I've been obsessed with lately is the benefits and insidious discontents of the internet for writers and artists in general. Um, you've worked your entire career on the internet, and you found very clearly a very specific niche on there as well. How does a writer work? How do they compete with content on the internet? How do they use it to their benefit? I guess what's your read on the internet? Because it's not going away.
Boy, I hate the internet, of course, because it's where I work. Um, the internet is saying the internet is so vast. There are lots of
Mm-hmm.
different ways that writers and creative people can interact with the internet, and lots of them are probably harmful, and lots of them are great and useful. For me, the part of my brain that writes listicles is actually pretty different from the part of my brain that writes fiction. It's not a different language, it's a different rhythm. But one thing that it really has done for me as a writer is it has given me the ability to just forge forward, just get something done on deadline. It's like a kind of momentum that fuels itself
Mm-hmm.
because I've been doing this for 10 years, I have to get it done at the end of the day. You got to get it
Yeah.
done. And so it has really helped me to, when I'm writing fiction, to just muscle through, even if I have to go back and change everything later. I never get stuck in any real way. And I do think it's because I've had all these years of writing on deadline and then just hitting publish. It's also about letting go of having every single thing be perfect. In a sort of broader way, I think things like social media are great for writers who like them
Mm-hmm.
and are not great for writers who don't like them. I don't particularly enjoy social media, and it's never going to do anything for my career as a novelist because
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like a natural medium to me. There are plenty of people for whom it is a natural medium, and it's going to be great for their work because it fits in with them.
Mm-hmm.
But I really don't think you can fake it or force it. Publishing houses will say to you, like, maybe you should get that follower count up for promotion. But I think if you're trying too hard, it's obvious. You have to like it and enjoy it. There's something out there for everyone on the internet.
Yeah, there's little corners that people tend to rave about.
Yeah.
On a slightly different note, you wrote about, as we said, the internet's got countless things on it, and you wrote an article
Uh-huh.
about a paper published in a psychology bulletin that seemed to focus specifically on the niche of literary fiction and said reading literary fiction early in life is associated with a more complex worldview. Do you think there's any consequences with treating literary fiction, holding it into its own category, separate from other literature and from other content that it might be similar to, I guess?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean. I mean, literary fiction is a genre like any other
Mm-hmm.
genre. So, literary fiction is not good and then everything else is bad. Literary fiction is a genre in the same way that romance is a genre, is the same as fantasy is a genre, is the same as historical fiction is a genre. The only thing that differentiates literary fiction. I mean, and by genre, I mean they all have their own conventions.
Mm-hmm.
How do you classify anything as anything? You look at the different parts and see like where does this fit in. Literary fiction, there's this cachet to it.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make any money, so
No.
I don't. It's not from that, but but it is. We do have this particular cultural cachet attached to it. So I don't know if that's harmful. I mean, we have cultural cachet attached to lots of different things. HBO scripted dramas versus reality television. You know,
Yeah.
those are different genres of the same medium.
Mm-hmm.
Is it dangerous to say that one is, I mean, is one better? I actually think that there are plenty of non-literary novels that are better than plenty of literary novels, but there's good and bad in every genre. So I don't know. I mean, obviously this study,
Yeah.
they were analyzing something very specific. And so essentially what they were looking at was how do the generic conventions of literary fiction affect the way that its readers think about the world?
Mm-hmm.
And because literary fiction tends to have more complex, more open-ended, more challenging situations, and romance novels, they tend to end in happy ending. That's
Yeah.
kind of the point.
Yeah.
People get annoyed if they don't. That's the point of them. That doesn't make them bad, but you can see where if that was all you read, you might get a little entrenched in that mentality. But I don't know. I didn't do the study.
Even when you talk about this study, you kind of just present it without giving a specific take on it. They stress in that study the idea of attributional complexity. I guess, do you read into that? Do you think reading literary fiction specifically does lead to a more engaging worldview because of increased attributional complexity or being presented with more ideas of difference, I guess, is my question.
Are you going to make me answer whether I think people who read literary fiction?
I mean, you can skate
Um,
around it. No worries.
you know, I haven't done any studies on the topic, but there's a new study that comes out every few months
Mm-hmm.
that literary Twitter jumps on. Literary reading makes you more empathetic. Reading makes you a better person. Reading makes you live longer. Reading whatever. There's
Yeah.
always a new study being done that makes people who read feel better about themselves and feel like I'm better than other people. I do think that there is value in literature that exposes you to different viewpoints and different ways of seeing. And that doesn't have to be particularly profound. It doesn't have to be reading about someone who is totally different from you in every single way, although that's a great thing that you can do
Mm-hmm.
with literature. But the thing that literature gives us that other media doesn't as well is the sensation of being directly inside somebody else's head.
Mm-hmm.
Film doesn't do that very well. TV doesn't do it. It really the best medium for having the experience of someone else's mind and having somebody else's experience as closely as possible, which is not very closely because obviously you can't ever be in anyone else's mind.
Yeah.
Not yet. Literature is the closest we get to that. And I think these studies point to for me is, and I think a problem that we have in the world is it's better if you can believe that other people are as full and emotionally and as intellectually complex as you are. And that sounds simple and obvious, but if you look at some of the things that are going on in the world, it really feels like some people don't realize that. And I do think literary fiction, because of its emphasis on quality of mind
Mm-hmm.
as its subject, and obviously not all of it, but a lot of it, um, at least it makes sense to me that that would help its readers to be able to imagine that other people's realities, different though they might be
Yeah.
from their own,
Mm-hmm.
would be legitimate and just and that their experiences would have just as much weight as their own.
A last question on a
See, I
similar note.
answered it.
Yeah, lovely. A last question on that similar note. In the last episode, the writer Joanne Beard lamented the fact that because of the internet and the fact that we're all addicted to a multitude of medium, that reading in its purest form is changing and disappearing. You talked about how literature is still the best way that we have to get inside the human experience, essentially. Do you think it's changing, or very broad open, or do you think it still has the same effect?
I think it's hard to know what other people are doing in the privacy of their own homes when it comes to reading.
Mm-hmm.
You can you can know what they say they're doing and you can see what they post on Instagram,
Yeah.
but I don't know that I can say that how people are reading is changing. But I do think that the ways in which we can publicly talk about what we're reading and the way we the world of book criticism,
Yeah.
that is definitely changing. And so maybe that means that reading is changing, because certainly there's an argument that the way that you engage with criticism of books you're reading and the way that you create criticism of books you're reading is a part of reading and the reading world. But I think time will tell whether that's good or bad. I mean, just because we're not talking about books the way that we used to talk about books doesn't mean that we're talking about books badly.
Yeah.
I am not on TikTok, so I can't tell you, but apparently that's a place to talk about books.
I entered a part of TikTok where people were talking about books, and it's people hating on Sally Rooney or loving Sally Rooney, and I enjoy Sally Rooney, so I don't mind it.
Yeah, well, that's what professional critics are
Yeah.
doing too.
Yeah.
On Sally Rooney or loving Sally Rooney. You're right, Sally Rooney's great.
Last question, something you clearly enjoy. What have you been reading, listening to, or watching that you've enjoyed?
Oh, well, I have been reading this book called Saint Sebastian's Abyss. Actually, I wrote a little piece on LitHub about it. It is so fun, really short, and just perfect for anyone who likes really snarky snobs talking about art.
Uh-huh.
So I have been read that. I'm looking at my TBR here as Daniel Goebel's The Absolute, which I'm excited to read. I recently had a baby, so I haven't been reading as much as I usually have. However, I have been watching What We Do in the Shadows, which is incredible, recommended to everyone. As a lifelong Buffy stan, I'm here for all irreverent vampire media, not the Twilight stuff, but the good stuff.
Okay. All right. I believe that is it. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And that's our show. Special thanks to Emily Temple for joining me on this episode. To learn more about her work and see a list of her recommendations, visit the show notes. Cultural Mixtapes is written and produced by me, Tejas Srinivasan. The music you heard on today's episode was Beethoven's Sonata No. 26 and Chopin's Sonata No. 2, recorded by me. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, review, and share on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen. Thank you very much for listening.